your hands on top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
Bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I'm your host, Patrick Jordan, here on YouTube's Pop Culture Minefield. We're also on Rumble, so go to Rumble, Pop Culture Minefield. You can find us there. So on YouTube, I want you guys to subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to the channel. We are growing in our subscribership on YouTube. We want you, if you're not a subscriber, please hit that bell and subscribe. If you're following us on Rumble, and we're picking up our following there, you actually got to follow us. So on YouTube, you subscribe. On Rumble, you follow. And when you see the shows, be sure to like the show, make a comment, and forward to a friend. Our goal is to grow these channels, and we need your help to do that. Now, my shows, this show here, I go over law enforcement-related movies, crime movies, and I usually have a couple of guests with me, which is I have here today. And we get interesting commentary. We talk about our own careers, we talk about the movie, and we talk about what's going on today. But I also comment about the politics of today on Twitter. So you can find my Twitter feed at LASD Jordan, LASD. That's Lincoln Adam Sam David Jordan. You just find me on Twitter there. And I talk about a variety of issues on Twitter. But you can also well, before I talk about my other show, let's talk about the Los Angeles Mission. So the Los Angeles Mission services the homeless in downtown Los Angeles. You can find the Los Angeles Mission at losangelesmission.org. They serve over 400,000 meals a year to the homeless down on Skid Row. They provide wraparound services for those who want to get off the streets, and they provide basic services for those who are just not ready to get off the street. They service the needs of thousands of people every year. They have a faith-based element, so that limits the amount of money they can get from government. Do me a favor, go to losangelesmission.org, make a small donation, help somebody out today. This is probably the biggest scourge in our society today, is what we've done with the homeless. And so do your part, cut government out, and go directly to this service provider. They've been doing it for 85 years. They have an excellent reputation. Now, my other show is Briefing with the Chief, and it is on KGRADB.com. And so I do a show every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the KGRA podcasting platform on Rumble. You can find it on their Twitter feed. You can also find it on their Facebook page. But unfortunately, that podcast goes behind a paywall after about 5 days. And you can see scrolling at the bottom of the screen is where you can find the audio versions of my show. You can go to www.speaker.com, Briefing with the Chief, and you can binge with the Chief. I have like 16 shows there. I talk about a variety of issues. I've had one of my guests who's on today, Vic Ferrari. We went over his book, NYPD Through the Looking Glass. I had Danny R. Smith. You've seen him on the show. We did his biography, Nothing Left to Prove. I have another book that I'm going to do. It is Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy, and it will include Boone, who was actually in the fight in Benghazi when they tried to take out the CIA annex. He went to the aid of the counselor's office, tried to save the ambassador. But we have a couple of CIA agents that wrote that book to tell the truth, and I'm about a third of the way through that book, and it just doesn't match up with the public narrative in the media, which is why I do this show, Briefing with the Chief, on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Let's show the banner there, because it is a show that is dedicated to law enforcement. I do come up with a lot of different things, and I have this. I asked for this great banner where they'd show the a chief standing in front of the guys giving a briefing. Let's see, can we get that banner up? There it is. And of course, I wanted the thin blue line flag, which they had a recent story in New York where they demanded that the firefighters take the thin red line flag, said it was a political symbol, and finally some common sense prevailed. You can take that down, Martine. And they let those guys use their thin red flag on their fire trucks. Of course, we'll never get the thin blue line flag flying at any police stations or sheriff stations. Way too many people are afraid of the woke mob, and that's really what I talk about on my show. So on my other show, Briefing the Chief, we talk about the border, we talk about Soros-funded DAs. I got contacts in Chicago, I got contacts in Austin, Texas, and certainly here in Los Angeles, the different Soros-funded DAs and how they are wreaking havoc on those cities. I hope to expand those contacts so I could talk about how these Soros-funded DAs are destroying most of our cities. I've talked about police suicides. So a wide variety of issues. I had an FBI whistleblower on the show, so really good guests, really good content, and I'm looking forward to the shows that are coming up, including the show regarding Benghazi. Also, for those folks who are listening to us from Los Angeles, I have Nathan Hawkman, who is running against George Gascon. He came in number 2 in the primary, or in the primary, so he's in the runoff with Gascon, and it's looking really good for him. The poll numbers are looking really good for him. So he's coming on my show. I have the CEO for the Los Angeles mission. So you hear me talk about it. Well, I'm going to have him come on my other show, and we will talk about the Los Angeles mission. So I have a lot of exciting guests. Tune in every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you can't tune in, you can go to Speaker and get all the audio versions of my show. There is no reason why you can't binge with the Chief. So let's get to this show today. On this show, I'm going to do the movie Serpico, and I have a couple of New Yorkers who are coming on with me, one from NYPD and the other one from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, but he grew up in upstate New York, worked as a cop in upstate New York before he came to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. I met him, we became friends, and he's been on my show multiple times. That is a retired LASD Sergeant Cliff Yates. Hey, Cliff.
What's up, Chief? How are you?
I'm doing good. I did a plug for my other show, my other podcast. I should let you do a plug for yours. So tell everybody about your podcast, what you got going.
My show is the Cliff Yates Show. It's on YouTube. It's on all the podcast platforms, and we do personal growth, how to be better and better each and every day. But we have been touching on a few cultural issues of recent episodes. I've had a couple of people who are actually training people tactically, even church safety teams, citizens, and also the military in tactics involving firearms and what we can do to be really surviving on the streets in today's chaotic world. And that's what I'm all about. And I'm excited about today's episode because a friend of mine recently, within the last 2 years, he actually went to Frank's place in upstate New York and had contact with him. We can talk about that. But Frank is alive and still he's doing well.
God, how old is he now? I didn't even check to see how old he might. He must be in his 80s.
70s or 80s, yeah. But he's doing well.
Yeah, I did a couple of great interviews. Since you're doing some self-defense stuff, you might hit up former Assistant Sheriff Todd Rogers. I don't know.
Yes, yeah.
And he's got his Rogers self-defense. He also is the lead plaintiff on the zero bail or the bail reform out here. A bunch of cities are suing, and they needed a citizen complainant. He came on as a citizen complainant, and we did a couple of great shows. But he does self-defense. He has his own business.
That's fantastic.
So you might hit him up and
yeah,
and maybe you guys can pull a show together.
And I'm now in free Florida. We do fly the blue line flag. The police cars have "In God We Trust," and it's a little different thing here. Pro law enforcement, pro Second Amendment, and pro USA here in free Florida. I love it.
Free Florida. Okay, all right. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I'm still fighting the fight in California. We're trying to move towards the center here. It is a battle because of the disinformation, lies spread by the mainstream media and our politicians. And I think people realize when their lips are moving, they're malign. It's just how much are they willing to tolerate. And we just haven't got the community quite there yet, and hopefully we can move them to the center at least. Yeah, I know you're shaking your head, but you know what? Hey, I'm up for difficult tasks. I'll give it a shot. But, let's bring our second guest on. And he is a retired detective from NYPD. He went down and did some law enforcement work in Florida as well. He wrote the book, let's see, Vic Ferrari, let's bring him on. He wrote the book, NYPD Through the Looking Glass. You might want to tilt your screen down a little bit there because we're only, there we go. And I had him on my other show where we reviewed his book, and it was a fun book, NYPD Through the Looking Glass, because it has just a lot of fun stories that he was aware of, experienced, and it was a little more light than some of my other stuff. I mean, I'm doing another book review, Vic. I don't know if you heard it. I'm be doing Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy, with some folks who were actually in Benghazi when the fight was going on. So that probably a little more serious, a little more intense, and it's shocking. I don't know if you guys were aware, but that was Al Qaeda was actually behind that attack, and you wouldn't know that if you listened to our politicians. And these two CIA agents wrote a book explaining and showing the linkages of who's who in the zoo, who was part of the attack. It was actually two different groups. The first attack was on the counselor's office to get the ambassador. The goal was to kidnap him. That was done by Al Qaeda, and not to be outdone, another group decided, well, let's go attack the CIA annex. so it's like I said, I'm about a third way of the book. It's very interesting. But hey, so you also have a podcast, Vic. Do you want to talk a little bit about your podcast and promote your book before we get into the movie?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Chief. Cliff, how you doing? I'm Vic Ferrari. I'm host of a podcast called NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast. It's a behind-the-scenes look into the NYPD, where I bring on retired NYPD members from different units that share their stories. I also tell some of my stories from my books. I recently just published my 7th book. It's right here, NYPD Laughing in the Line of Duty, another behind-the-scenes comical look at the NYPD.
Well, great. Well, yeah, I have to tell you, if you have not heard my show with Vic, go back and listen to the show. I do a lead-in with I forget the lead-in was a candidate who was running for DA, Eric Seidel, and he did a great interview. And then Vic came on, and we got a little more lighthearted with Vic. Eric's was pretty serious, and I don't know if you've been paying attention, Vic, but unfortunately, Eric lost the primary, but some of the candidates are coming out that ran against Gascon and supporting the new guy, Nathan Hochman. So, and again, I don't know if you guys are paying attention, but in Chicago, Cook County, Illinois, is the 3rd largest city. The replacement for Kim Foxx, the political machine's replacement, a far left person who's going to replace her, lost. And they got a combative, moderate Democrat judge who stood up and said, I'm tired of this happening in my city. And so she won the primary, and like in New York, whoever normally wins the Democratic Party usually ends up winning the race, right? So it's looking pretty good in Chicago. We need to make some changes here in Los Angeles, and hopefully we'll get rid of the Soros-funded DA here. But so we're going to get to the movie Serpico, and I've been wanting to do this show for a while. I mean, I've done so many different shows regarding New York. And I mean, we did Prince of the City. I don't know if I did that with both of you guys.
Yep.
I think I did, right?
Yeah.
And then I did the French Connection, and then largely this basically the sequel to the French Connection. I think that was the real one was the 7-Ups. So a lot of good crime drama coming out of New York. But this movie was released as Serpico was released in 1973. It's an American biographical crime drama, and it was done by Sidney Lumet, and it was from a book written by Peter Moss, who was a reporter at the time in New York, who partnered with Serpico to write the book. And as I listened to some of the reviews, the suggestion was that this story in the movie wasn't consistent with what really happened. And I don't know how much of it is true. Maybe we can flesh out some of that here. But it is a real story about corruption involving, Serpico, Officer Serpico, and Frank Serpico, and that he experienced on the NYPD. And I think we need to talk a little bit about the history, and maybe Vic, you can help here. Is New York has always had some level of corruption that was accepted, but over the years, there's been a progression to professionalism in the police department. I mean, that started way back with Teddy Roosevelt, where he implemented an entrance exam for the NYPD, right? And then he ended up on a commission for the federal government to bring in civil service, which then flowed to states, counties, and cities as well. And all of these things worked to help weed out the corruption over time, not only with the NYPD, but other municipal government and other agencies within the city. But it takes multi-generations to get rid of multi-generations of corruption. I mean, that's kind of how I see it. And I think New York has been on that path to weed out with ups and downs. And do you want to comment a little bit about corruption in New York? And
Yeah, it goes in stages. What'll happen is, I mean, this obviously the Serpico era was a decade and a half before I came on. I got hired in 1987.
Yeah.
But what happened is with the Serpico scandal and the Knapp Commission, it did exposed a lot of corruption. A lot of it was flowing up. And wound up happening is the NYPD always, you can count on it, they always overreact. And what they did was they put so many changes in place that it helped fuel crime because it tied the cops' hands because they didn't want them doing a lot of things that they were doing pre-Knapp Commission. And then what happens is that gets out of control. And then they have to take the handcuffs off the police. It's a yin and yang that goes back and forth. But when I was hired in 87, there still was a lot of that funk from the Knapp Commission. You still had guys that had been hired and lived through that were still around. And a lot of them were bitter for a lot of reasons.
Well, in this show, it does show that everywhere Serpico went, he ended up in corruption. But, you know, he also ended up in plainclothes units. So, and certain units are, you know, when there's a lack of accountability, I mean, we found this on the sheriff's department as well. They can be corrupted a lot easier, right? Because there's a lack of account, or just a lack of focus on the unit. There's a great deal of trust placed in plainclothes folks or people who have worked hard to get to specialized units. And it is not emblematic. The corruption you saw in this movie is not really all of the NYPD. And I imagine that's why a lot of people were bitter. That's what I remember when they were following a couple guys around when I was working, and they weren't sure how many people were corrupt. And they followed us all, and they watched us all for months. And this is the Graham Desiree case, Cliff. And in the end, it was basically these two guys, but the team that they were on were maybe they were doing some inappropriate things. They weren't corrupt themselves, but they weren't really putting in a full day's work either. But all of us were followed, and so it leaves a bitter taste if you are an honest, hardworking guy, which is what you see in Serpico, and you're followed, and you get a little offended, although you understand why. And was that part of the bitterness that these folks had?
Well, the NYPD, when they go after corruption, they don't go in with a scalpel. They often toss in a hand grenade. And there's a lot of collateral damage where people get bumped from their assignments. People get, screwed for just knowing a guy, or it's almost like you hear like with the mobsters, like I didn't even know this guy. I winked at him at a barbecue, and the next thing I know, I'm getting 5 years. So it was kind of that. Yeah. And then there were also the old dinosaurs that were used to doing things a certain way, not corrupt, but nowadays would be thought of as out of bounds, and they couldn't do it anymore. And they were pissed off. But Serpico, I knew some old timers, the late Sonny Grasso, who was actually, instrumental in the French Connection. I met him, and he brought Serpico up to me one time. Well, I brought him up, and he said he was a different kind of guy, that he worked with him in the narcotics division. And he goes, did you ever know a guy, he goes, on the job or somewhere that just doesn't fit in? Now, that's not to say that he wasn't exposed to all this corruption stuff, but I think a lot of it was, from what I was told from Sonny Grasso and others, that he just was a guy that just refused to conform in any way.
Yeah, and I do get that out of the movie. You do see that. And, it's funny because it's law enforcement, Cliff, law enforcement can be very clannish, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't go along with the peer group, sometimes you can be ostracized, or they treat you differently. I'll be honest with you. My peer group were the other old married guys with kids at home. That's who I was. I didn't drink with the guys, and not that people looked at me suspiciously because I was a good street cop, but I wasn't always included in that clubbish kind of stuff because I kind of rejected those things. And I say this because my dad was a cop, and I just saw some of the, I don't want to get into this whole drinking thing. I didn't want to party in after duty. I had other things I wanted to do. And so I purposely didn't do all of that stuff. And I wouldn't say that I wasn't accepted, but I wasn't part of the in group, and I was okay with that. And I guess they were okay with it too. But it can be very clannish, right?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. There was a couple of recent interviews with Serpico. So I guess he was on set when they were filming, and that he kind of pointed out that most of it was that he said Al Pacino overacted a lot of it. But he did say the one scene where they put the gold shield on his chest in the hospital didn't happen. He just got it across the desk, not even invited to a ceremony. But other than that, he said that was pretty accurate. But I guess that one scene where he throws a guy down on the floor, I guess he did have a black belt in some kind of martial arts.
Yeah, that, I want to get into that story because he said he's a cop killer, and I looked it up, and that's actually a true story.
Yeah.
That they were friends with this guy who had killed an off-duty cop, which was shocking to me. I mean, you would think, back then they weren't death on running people, so I mean, it wasn't you could still run people back then and see if they had criminal records without getting in trouble, right?
Yeah.
You would think that they would run who they're hanging out with to make sure that they're okay. I mean, there's degrees of corruption, I guess, and degrees of association. If they kill the cop, I don't want anything to do with the guy, right? But that's not the case. But let's show the first scene, and it's the officer down, and it starts with this, and it's a good hook. It's kind of like when I did Danny R. Smith's book, and he talked about rolling to a murder scene where there was heads hanging from a tree, and of course that captures you want to hear about the story about the heads hanging in the tree, right? And so here you're watching the movie, and they lead with him. He's shot, and he's heading to the hospital, and he was shot in the face, if I remember correctly, in the true story. And they're rushing him. They do a scoop and run, which is, we try to stop that as supervisors, because generally the paramedics are best to handle it, and they're running him to the hospital. So I did want to ask a couple of things about this, Vic. First of all, the police cars are in. Were any of those, are those consistent? Did they actually get? I know this would have been a decade after you, but is that something you remember seeing as a kid, those types of cars?
Oh, yeah, the green and whites. Yeah, they were around when I was a little boy, and then they went to the blue and whites, and now they're the ridiculous white. But yeah, they had the old big green and white, green, black, and white police vehicles.
Why green? I understand the whole, a lot of Irish folks on the department there at the time, probably, but I don't get the green. Just doesn't. I mean, usually that's dictated by state law, but maybe New York just went its own direction. Because here in California, you got to be black and white, I think, or you can get some variations, but most people are black and white. The other thing, scoop and run. We try to discourage that. It does happen here in LA. Do you guys do that in New York? Somebody goes down and you scoop and run to the hospital, or
Especially a cop, yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things, because it's like, they've argued, the medical guys have argued, stabilize till the paramedics get there, because they can further stabilize and start treatment sooner than scooping them to the hospital. But the emotion of one of your guys going down, and you think I can get them there quicker, is, that's a tough one. Because we were, as a supervisor, I was told, hey, tell your guys to stay and stabilize till paramedics get there. They got a better chance of surviving. But it goes against the emotion of the situation, all of your intuitions. Cliff, what do you think?
Yeah, but I was there on the scene when I guess it would have been 89-ish, when Todd Wallace was a deputy. He was a trainee. He got shot in the back of the neck, and they call it the corner pocket of South Central LA, which turned out to be, and he had quite a lot of blood coming out. You can imagine the back of his neck. But, Martin Luther King Hospital was a matter of probably a half a mile away, if not closer. So they did scoop him up and take him without the ambulance on that shooting. But you're right, it was very emotional. People that were showing up and seeing someone in uniform laying on the street there in the corner pocket, which was the county area of LA, just actually within probably a mile of the Watts Towers there. But quite a scene, and quite emotional, definitely.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I went to a shooting involving a deputy, and we get there first unit there, round the corner, and boom, 2 guys down. Female deputy,
Yeah.
male deputy. And fortunately, they weren't too seriously injured and recovered quickly. But yeah, your heart goes in your throat, and it's all emotion. And so I can understand that. It's just one of those things that I, as a supervisor, I tried to slow it down. Let's stabilize. Let's get the paramedics here. Let's get them in an ambulance. But he goes to the academy here, and I don't do this a whole scene here, but he goes to the academy here. I guess we can, but I want to show this pic, right? Can we show the pic first, Martine? And oh, here we go. We're going to go Frank Serpico. He's going through the academy, but right after this, there he goes. There it is. Now look at this pic here. Okay, you can take it down now. It's flipped backwards, right? But I saw that face and I go, oh, that's exactly the face from The Godfather. Now, you remember when he was sitting in the cafe, right? And you got exactly that look, same hairstyle. He's young looking, and it's the exact. You guys seen The Godfather,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Remember where he's Sollozzo. He's talking to Sollozzo, and you see that face. That is I go, that's it. Hey, that's as soon as I saw that. Hey, that's The Godfather. He's in the academy. So, and but here he is. He's going through the academy, and I don't know how. The other thing is I like all these old cars, but in this show, unlike like L.A. Confidential and some of the other movies I've done, all the cars are pristine. They're rebuilt. They're pristine, and not a dent on them. But you look at this movie here, they got a bunch of old beaters out there too to make it look realistic. Because if you're driving New York, you're going to have some dents, right, in your car. It's just the way it's going to be. And so seeing all these old cars and wondering how the hell all these big cars went on all those narrow streets is surprising to me. Because you just get a couple of those to stop in the middle of the road and it's done. But I did want to ask about, hey, so we're looking at the scene here. Is this what the NYPD stations look like when you first joined, Vic?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That dull, dreary, either green or blue paint on the wall, and probably back then it had lead in it. Yeah, that I mean, it's perfect. I mean, the way
well, that explains it. That's why all you guys.
It's true.
Well, one of the things, it's hard for me to contrast, right? I mean, other than our jails, which kind of can have that dreary kind of look for the LA County Sheriff's Department, when you got to the stations, most of the stations were fairly clean. I mean, we had a couple of older ones. I think El Todino is pretty old, built in the 1920s. But we also had inmates that cleaned and they painted, and it was a big deal. If the sheriff came through and your place didn't look right, there was demerits for the captain, right? So we were always cleaning the place. The floors were always being waxed and scrubbed. You named it. It looked good. And so when I see this, I go, wow, is that, because this does remind me a little bit when I visited my dad in Detroit, when he worked for Detroit Police. They had some dreary looking precincts, and completely different than my experience. I don't know, Cliff, you started out in upstate New York.
Yeah, to go to the obviously it's a different state laws there, because our sheriff cars in upstate New York were red and white, and so
like a firefighter.
Yeah, so red and white. The sheriff's star was actually red on a white background, and a lot of the smaller agencies had blue and white, and so they weren't restricted in that regard. But I had an NYPD officer ride with me in upstate New York, and it seemed odd to me when he said it until I got to LA, but. Yeah, he rode with me, and he was, and this was 1979, and so he's like, "Wow, these cars are so clean and good shape. I've never seen anything like this." Like, what? He goes, "Oh yeah, you wouldn't believe it. We have to drive," and so I think that goes to how it shows in the movie, how accurate that probably is. Vic can probably attest to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I worked at one station where the captain was death on the cars. He wanted the cars to be clean and have hubcaps. He didn't want them to look like they were ghetto rides, right? He wanted them to look, because he felt, and there's probably something true about this, is the better it looked. Hey, Danny Regalado, thanks for tuning in. It is a great movie.
And
I should be at the Roundup. We've talked about maybe doing a show at the Roundup next year, Danny. So maybe
Danny would be great.
So maybe it'll be a Cliff show, and then we'll just tape it. And run it, right? And maybe Cliff can jump in and host.
That'd be great.
But thanks for tuning in. tell the rest of the guys to tune in, and this is a great movie.
Hey,
Wanna say hi
Pat,
to-
a lot of our cars in Linwood, though, man, they were. I remember seeing the street underneath through the holes in the floorboard, and we actually even had to do a graffiti check on our cars before we could go 10-8 with them to make sure there wasn't any things carved in the steering wheel.
You know, I was put in charge of the fleet as a sergeant at one of the stations, and I have to tell you, I wasn't all that excited about it because the captain was death on this, and we they had the foam steering wheels.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And there was divots in the steering wheel, and
That's correct. Yeah.
the captain was convinced that the deputies were using their buck knives and cutting divots into the steering wheel. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, there might be one or two guys who do that goofy stuff, but I didn't think so. And so finally I figured it out, right? And because I looked at the steering wheel, and the divot was it was at like the 4 or 5 o'clock, right in that area on the steering wheel. And if you're getting out quickly, the holsters we had, remember those brake front
Oh, yeah.
for the 9s? They were kind of a hard plastic covered with leather. Well, if you got out quickly, like we train people to do, that holster catches right around that place on the steering wheel every time. And so if you're an active copper and you're in and out of the car, you're catching it every single time, right?
Yeah.
And so that was what was creating the divots. And I finally took the guy out there and I showed him, hey, listen, this is what's creating the divots in the steering wheel, right? We should get harder plastic if you want to do that. And I showed him, and he goes, well, they should raise the steering wheel and put the seat back before they get out. That's what he told me. And I'm like, okay, well, they're getting out fast because they're thinking that they've got a hot thing going on here. So there is a point in time where people get a little unrealistic about stuff. But I'll be honest with you, I like a nice police car when I get in the car, nice and clean. I was happy to promote the sergeants because generally the sergeants' cars are pretty clean. I enjoy
Yeah,
that.
I love them. Yeah.
Do you guys remember the Chevy Caprices with the bench seats?
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Our cars would go 24/7. In one precinct I worked in, I did 4 to 12s on the day shift. We had 2 very obese female cops that weighed in excess of 250 pounds each.
Yikes.
Within a month, their tonnage would break the bench seats. So you would get into the car and you'd step on the gas or go to a heavy call. You'd go into the back seat. So I had to go to a local dairy, and get milk crates and prop them up in the back seat. And then I wasn't the only one, it was other police cars, I had seen it. And then if you had an arrest, you either had to throw the bad guys in another R&P, or you would take the milk crates and put them in the trunk and just drive slow to the station house.
Yeah. You know what? I think there was only I did work Century, and they were a little better with the cars there, although I have to say they were a little rougher than the other stations I worked. I don't know. I do think if the car looks clean and you look clean, I won't go as far as saying that's going to stop the riot. You know what I mean? I think it does present a little different picture. I don't, it's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine, Scott Orr. I don't know if you remember Scott.
Yep.
And,
Very good.
And the sheriff's department now has these vests that a lot of people wear. Well, the first command that was allowed to wear these vests, it's a what we call a load bearing vest. So you can put your radio on there, you can put some other things on there, and it takes the weight off your back. And I was the chief of transit at the time. So we did the study. We pulled a bunch of literature together done by the military and other law enforcement agencies. And we argued for our guys who were working footbeat to wear these load bearing vests because it took the weight off their back. And so we got the exception. We were allowed to do that, but I hate them. I know they're good, but they just don't look good. I don't, and they need to probably change them every couple of years because they got the food stains on them or whatever. I was watching a guy who was involved in a fight. I think it was I can't remember where it was, Alabama. And he had one of those on and the guy was grabbing on his stuff. So I don't like that either. But it just takes away from what I would think is a good, clean look for a police officer. But it also probably saves their back, but on the sheriff's department, it's become more widespread than just transit. More people are now wearing it. I don't know if that's the case for you. What do you think of uniform appearance and all that stuff, Vic?
No, I agree with you. A professional image, people will respect you a little bit more. It might be a deterrent when people dealing with police, it'll go easier as if they see some guy show up. We used to call it a hairbag. Hairbag is a guy with 1,000,001 uniform deficiencies. His hair is past his collar. It's right off the bat, someone's sizing, just as much as cops size people up when they walk up to them, the public is sizing you up.
Right. And the other thing, I never got into the street banter, hey bro, hey homie. I never did any of that stuff either. I always felt, I'm just going to be who I am, professional, and people react to that. I always felt a little differently. But other people, it worked for them. It just didn't work for me. It looked fake for me doing it, so. But hey, in this scene, we see Serpico working some street stuff. This isn't about his time on the streets as a uniform, but I noticed one thing in the car, Vic, the telephone radio. Did you see that where he picked up like a handset telephone? I go, did that ever exist? I mean, I started working in '83. We didn't have. We just had a regular old radio, 4 channels, I think, right?
Yeah.
Cliff.
CHEW. Yep.
CHEW, 4 channels, go to Charlie, go to William. That's all we pretty much had. We didn't, and they were just regular radio mics. You didn't have this. Did they actually have that, or was that just
they might have, but by the time I got hired, we had the Motorola Brick, the gray snap-on heavy-duty battery. The only thing was for the PA system was that mic, where guys, what they would do is the hairbags, they would take the extension of the mic and hang it over the mirror so they could yell at people, or they would squeeze it and tell somebody to move out of their way. But no, I never saw the telephones inside a police car.
Well, I just thought that was interesting. And we had both the mic and then the radio thing. And we didn't actually get the handhelds. I think when did we get the handhelds, Cliff? That was
after late 80s, because when I went to patrol in 87, we had to hang our mic out the window and try to fight back to the car. So we had no handhelds. No. So maybe 89-ish, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I remember we were in a fight. I was in a fight in the backyard, and I don't want to say we were losing, but we weren't winning either, right? And you're just, all you could do is yell, hey, call the station, call the sheriff's station.
That's all you could do.
Need help. And, the neighbors would normally call. Even the bad guys who didn't like you would, okay, get a call. They're messing up business. Let's get rid of these guys so we can.
My TO would say, hang your mic out the window, because you might have to fight you might get back to the car, but you're not going to get back inside of it.
Yeah, I at the end, then you made sure you had your Streamlight, the old Streamlight. Remember those?
Yeah. Oh,
so if you're in a fight, say a deputy involved in a fight, and we didn't have handhelds, you kind of gave an area that you're at as you're chasing after the guy, and the helicopter would come over. And as soon as you hear him, you hit your beam with your flashlight, so they would know where you're at. And that's how we did it back in the day. We didn't really have these handhelds, so we got spoiled once we started having that. Here's the other thing: you couldn't leave your car. We didn't have a lunch break, right? So you couldn't leave your car. You had to get your food and eat off the hood of your radio car, right? And the handhelds, we could go into a restaurant.
This is weird. Yeah, this was like weird.
It was completely different for us. Wow. And I had worked the streets, I think, since '85 I started working. So we didn't get them for probably 4 years. So most of them.
That makes sense. 89-ish. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. But the other thing is the telephone book interview. I saw that. And this is probably his Serpico's first, inkling that, okay, some of these things I don't really appreciate, I don't like, right? And he actually, it was out of his area, right? He goes out of his area to deal with the rapist. They catch the rapist, and then he gets taken in the room, and the guy beats a confession out of him. That's what's said in the movie. I don't know how much truth that is. I have heard of telephone books being used in the past. I don't know why. I think they would leave marks, but so anyways, Vic, what'd you think of the scene? Any old timer saying, yeah, that did happen?
I can tell you it happened. My old man got arrested as a young kid, as a teenager, and he got brought into an NYPD precinct, and he told me they beat the bejesus out of me. And I said, were you mouthing off? He said, nope. So yeah, it did go on.
What year would that have been? Because
my dad, 1956, 1955.
So before Escobedo, before all those rules that change, all the rules that came in, hey, you can't do that stuff. So okay, and we're talking about it takes multiple generations for departments that are used to corruption. Because I did a show on Chicago, and they're so corrupt there that when you live there, corruption looks normal, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's true.
There has to, it looks normal, right? And they were pushing the political machine was pushing this one candidate who was actually farther left than Kim Foxx, and everybody was falling in line behind him, right? Until this judge says no way, and then but she was part of the machine there, right? She owed her allegiance to that, but she said, "Hey, it's destroying our city," and she finally stood up and said no, right? And but that's what it takes. It takes somebody like her. It takes somebody like Serpico. Even the prince of the city, although that guy was corrupt, he did step up and say, "Hey, this isn't right. I don't feel right about this." But he eventually gets into plain clothes. This is Serpico. He goes to plain clothes, and I wanted to ask. So let's roll that scene, the bullpen. So when I looked at this, this also, I worked at Detective Bureau, and you kind of have, it is kind of a bullpen. Here he is. But it's like when I looked at this scene, there you could see the detective area. It's just like this big bullpen. That is that how the detective units were? Everybody was squeezed into an area, multiple desks.
What the scene you're showing now?
Well, I think it's going to come up. This is him in uniform. I think I might.
That looks just like roll call.
That looks like a roll call, right? And but I did have a question. Here's the bullpen. Sorry. So he's working in the area where they're doing fingerprints, right? But in the previous scene, if you notice, the desk guy had a round badge. Did you notice that? He had a round badge, and then the other guy had the standard shield.
Well, the round badge is the lieutenant's shield.
Oh, it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Gold round one is a lieutenant.
Are the badges? Is that the only rank that it's round?
Oh God. Everybody knows what a sergeant shield looks like. Detective shield's a little different. Captain shield is different, but perfectly round like that. That's a lieutenant.
That's a lieutenant. Wow. And so everybody can look through the crowd and say, "Oh, there's the lieutenant with the round badge. We can go get him." I would think that's the only reason that you'd have a little different shape of a badge. Wow, look at that trivia. Cliff, did you know that?
No, I had no idea. No.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can understand different color shields, but I would think they would be about the same with just rockers that say like lieutenant or captain, like we have on. Because mine is just a regular standard sheriff's badge, and it just says chief on it, and so it's not. Unless you got real close and looked at my chest, you wouldn't really know. You'd probably have to. You'd have to see the stars, but
every rank in the NYPD. I mean, a cop is the tin shield, right? It looks like aluminum foil, and then everything else is gold, but there's different variations of it.
Ah, look at that. We knew so. Well, hey, I guess they did a pretty good job of trying to show realistically who wore what and who looked like what. And I'm curious. I wonder if they actually shot any of these things in police stations. I didn't. Did you recognize any of the locations, Vic, as being real police stations?
No, the interior shots. No. Well, the scene where he throws the cop on the floor, that kind of looks like the 2-3 station house on the second floor. It looks like it, but all those other photos, I don't know where they were taken, but they certainly look like they could be a police station.
Well, in the scene, the bullpen, it does show a bunch of people looking at prints. So this would have been before your time, before we had automated print, right? And so you got these guys with their eyeglasses just quickly looking at these different stuff. And this is where the fact that he thinks this is the fast track to getting his gold shield, as he gets sucked into this unit, because I think they say that, if you want to get your gold shield, you go to this unit first, and that's the pathway. And he ultimately realizes that is not the pathway. But he's a little different than everybody else in the room, and this is where you really start to see it, because he's out of uniform, he's plain clothes, he's starting to grow a beard, he dresses a little differently than the rest of the guys who are dressed more like their traditional suits and stuff, and you begin to see this difference. And I think we probably need to talk about it. Not everybody fits into that round. Did you work with guys that you saw, Vic, that just did not fit the typical NYPD mode?
Oh yeah,
and pushed back against the culture?
Well, Chief, you were a supervisor, right?
Yeah.
And you managed cops and people, right? So, you would give an order or a directive, or there's a new policy. and maybe a couple of guys might question it or say something or grumble, but you're going to notice over time as a supervisor, it's the same guy or the same guys that for whatever reason, you could be doing something for them that would be really good, and they're still going to question it, and they're still going to complain about it. And I think that's, I mean, from the movie, that's where it shows. So he wants a gold shield. He realizes patrol isn't for him. So he puts in for BCI, which is fingerprints. Now, anybody knows you're going to be in one police plaza or back then somewhere in Lower Manhattan staring at fingerprints. Well, that doesn't work for him. And, you know, in the NYPD back then, most people that went into the NYPD had a military background, right? Because and they hired more people that had a military background. So now, and you're talking about this is the late 60s, early 70s. He's dressing like a hippie, which is kind of a slap in the face to the guys coming out of the military that are joining the NYPD. So he just, the way I looked at it was he did everything the wrong way as far as fitting in a paramilitary culture.
Yeah. We got a comment. Good morning, Vietnam. Yes. Yeah. And this would have been the time that we would have been hiring people who were coming in. Maybe they served in Korea, and they definitely served in Vietnam. And let's see, what does Ariel say here? Oh, wait, wrong place. Good morning, Pop Culture. Yes. Good morning, Pop Culture. And morning coffee with the chief. Yeah. And, you know, I'll have to tell this story just because I worked with a guy and I really liked him, but he leaned left, and we were working at a detective bureau together. And I was, his name was Dave Winkler, and on the side, he taught sociology at a community college. And so I was put in plain clothes. They said, okay, they're going to have a war demonstration. They were marching from the federal building to UCLA. And they said, okay, Pat, just go work the crowd, see what's going on. And if you hear anything bad, you know, get to a phone, because this was before cell phones. Get to a phone, call me on my satellite phone, the watch commander or the incident commander or satellite phone, and tell us what's going on. If they're changing direction, anybody's breaking off, that kind of stuff, right? And so I'm marching, you know, down with the war, doing my whole thing, and I see Dave in the crowd, and I go over to him. I said, "Hey, Dave, are you working?" He goes, "No, I'm against the war." I said, okay, I'm protesting. I said, okay, all right, not a problem. He goes, okay, well, I'm, you know, talk to you later, man. But that was Dave. You know, he was, and everybody loved him, but he definitely leaned left. He was a little different than everybody else. He was definitely squared away if he needed backup and all that stuff, but he saw things a little differently. And that goes against the culture, right? Because a lot of cops would have been, why are they protesting the war? I think this was, this would have been when we went into, let's see, wait a minute, the war. Oh, this would have been the first Gulf War. So it would have been Bush Senior. So what was that? Like 90s, yeah, 91, 90, 91 in that area. And I think a lot of people were supportive of that war, given that Iraq had invaded Kuwait. And so anyways, but he was against it. He was marching for it. But that's what we're talking about. You do have characters who push back against the grain, who don't go along with the culture. And Dave was one of those guys, although he was a good investigator. He was a property crimes investigator like me. But he just saw the world a little differently. And did you ever see anybody like that, Cliff?
No, I didn't. No, well, yes. But I want to jump on Vic's point there, because it would have been a raised animosity just because that the way of dress at the time would have been representative of people who were protesting the war or draft dodgers at the time, where there was a draft in the early 70s. So to see him come in that way, he would have been seen as that type. I just came back from war, and now you're dressing as someone who would have been against what I went overseas to fight for. So I can see how the animosity towards him would have been heightened because of that, the culture war at the time.
Yeah, and let's not forget the Weather Underground.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
That was protesting. You had the Black Panthers, the Black Liberation Army that was killing cops, and it wasn't all black people. It was a lot of rich liberal kids that went to these Ivy League schools that joined these underground organizations that were protesting and hurting cops.
Yeah, you had Jane Fonda sitting on the tank, and you had this type, and so there was definitely a delineation between the culture there. So he would have been seen as an opposition to pro-police, really.
Well, Cliff, or you guys, did you get anybody ever meet him? Was he really anti-cop or was he really anti-establishment? Because I don't necessarily get that out of the movie. He was anti-corruption.
I think he's anti-corruption. I'm just saying how probably the military people that they were hiring for probably saw him not in an accurate light, but together with what he was pushing against, probably created some heat.
Well, you know how it is in law enforcement. It's how you're perceived.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Amongst your peers. And, it's so if you go to the right or left of the dial one way or the other, right? And then guys start talking. And the way I look at it is he was a different kind of cat, but I don't think he really helped himself.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Some of the moves he made, which just kind of kept turning that dial until he, guys looked at him as that's just some guy I don't want to be around.
A stubborn Italian, right? That's what we're talking about here. If you're raised with, because he's raised Catholic most likely, and a set of values and a belief, what you believe law enforcement is, and then you're dashed by some of the episodes that you end up in. Because was NYPD as corrupt as presented in here? Because it kind of presents everywhere he goes, there's corruption, right? Well, maybe not at the fingerprint place, but he deals with it everywhere he goes as a plainclothes guy. So it gives this perception that it was corrupt everywhere. And I have a hard time struggling with that. Corruption does exist. I just don't see it as widespread. But he implies that it is in the movie, and he implies that people ahead of him are also corrupt. And let's show the scene, Paco, and I think this is where he first starts. He does end up in plain clothes. I forget he transfers. He gets out of fingerprints because they don't like him there. They want him out, and they make it very clear they want him out. I think, doesn't he get accused of giving somebody a blowjob in the bathroom or something like that?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen, and he finds this Bible thumping captain who kind of takes him under his wing, but doesn't really do anything other than move him around, right? And tells them that they're going to do the right thing. But he kind of adopts his nickname, Paco, and I write here in my notes, doesn't fit in, and which is what we see, or doesn't fit in. But part of this is there is a generational change, right? As you're coming through Vietnam and you have people who haven't served in the military and are a little more in tune to the culture, there is this generational change in the 60s that we saw coming out of the 50s into the early 60s and then the 60s and 70s, where people are dressing like he is. I would imagine at the time there were a lot of cops who had a little longer hair than we tolerate today, and just because it was anti-establishment, and that impacted every institution, including law enforcement. I doubt he's the only one that grew a beard or adopt this persona, right? But he does adopt this persona. Paco, he's got this girlfriend. He's realizing that there's this anti-police culture out there as he goes to this party. As soon as his girlfriend tells him that he's a cop, nobody wants to have anything to do with him. And he tells her, hey, don't say that. Let them get to know me first. Let them hear my interesting stories. But he doesn't fit in police work. He doesn't fit in here, but he really works hard to fit in here. Did you notice that in the scene? He really works hard to fit in and connect with these guys, but they're all also his age group, right? They're all in that age range. And when I looked at the scene, it goes, he didn't seem to work as hard to try and fit into the police culture, but he definitely tried to fit into this culture. Did you get that out of this scene, Vic?
Yeah, everything from where he lived, right? He was living down in the village. I don't think there were many cops living down in the village, from the girlfriend to the parties he was going to. Yeah, he was, again, he's just a different kind of guy, but the reoccurring theme is no matter where he goes, he's an outsider.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, when you do get into police work and you go to parties and tell people become friends with you, as soon as they find out you're a cop, they're a little, they wait a while till they get to know you, and then they'll start asking questions. I got this ticket, and then you'll start, the people open up. Hey, Danny, thanks for joining us. Take care of yourself, and like I said, thanks for tuning in. And Cliff and I are committed. We'll be at the next year's roundup.
We will be there. Yes.
Okay. And but so it takes a while for people who are non-law enforcement to maybe get to use, because I went to a parish, and you end up, once you have kids, and you end up interacting with a bunch of different people. It isn't just the guys you work with, right? And they start doing sports. My kids did a ton of sports, so you end up meeting those parents and interacting with them, and it takes a while for them to warm up to you. I was okay with the kids being leery of me, meaning my kids' friends, because that meant they didn't want to do anything stupid with my kids.
Yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah.
but it took once the parents warm up to you, it's fine. And just like anybody else, they see you as like anybody else. But there is this barrier with non-law enforcement, and then if you create a barrier with your own partners, it can become kind of lonely, which is also shown in this picture, right, Cliff? So.
Well, and this is the tragedy. We talked about this when we were addressing police suicides, because in the late 70s, I know in upstate New York and within the LA Sheriff's Department, I adopted it. They really were supportive of having outside interest, outside relationships, having a work-life balance. And I can tell you right now, the guys are being forced to work overtime, mandatory on a constant basis. There is no push towards having a balanced life. They're dealing with shortages, but I think in the mental health area of law enforcement, it's really impacting them. They're not supporting having the outside relationships anymore.
No, I did not have a police pad who's asking about that. I mean, at like his sporting games, not at all. I did not have that. No, it's not at all. So, but everybody wanted advice about their tickets. So and I didn't write a lot of tickets. But I one of the things, I have some notes written between these scenes that was interesting. So he does end up in plain clothes, but he ends up working by himself, which I find he's out there on
Unusual.
his
Yeah.
own. It's just shocking to me. He gets into a friendly fire situation. He has basically no backup, because I mean, this is before the handheld radios, and even if you're working plain clothes, you're not gonna carry a big radio like the Motorola's that Vic talked about. And then the other interesting thing is it seems like everybody wants the collar. I didn't understand that, Vic. Maybe you can help me out. When these guys roll into this, when they, like, he gets in the friendly fire situation, and the guys fired their guns. Well, they wanted to at least come up with a somebody to take to jail. Was there some big emphasis on getting the collar, even though somebody else might have done the work? I did, because this happened a few times in this movie, and I didn't understand it.
This happened before my time, but from what I understand, in the old days, when you made an arrest, you weren't getting overtime. You were on your own time, and maybe they might give you some time off, and it would take sometimes to process an arrest over a day. And you would take the prisoner down to court, and you would be down there with, I mean, they changed things. By the time I got hired, there was overtime for making an arrest. And I don't think a lot of cops were motivated by making arrests, but I think something like that, like a really good arrest, would put you in good standing with the commanding officer. Maybe you might get a day off or something. I do know the detectives, I mean, they wanted to handle, I remember, like, when I was in plain clothes, if you made a really good arrest, they'd want to enhance it, which was fine, because they were more skilled with debriefing a prisoner. But with certain arrests, sometimes they would try to see if they could worm it away from you, or sometimes give you an arrest that was a bag of crap, and I had that happen one time where it was this rotten robbery arrest, and this detective got into my sergeant's ear, and he's like, "Oh, he should take this. It's a robbery collar." And I says, "I don't want it. First of all, I don't trust this guy. And second of all, why is he giving this to me?" And it did. It turned out to be a big pain in the ass that went on for decades, because the guy fled the country, then came back, and I'm getting notifications for it. So it's like no good deed goes unpunished. But back then, I don't think guys were really motivated for making arrests, because they weren't making the overtime.
Got it. Yeah, our culture was a little different, Cliff. I remember when we came on, if you were working the streets, they recognized when you made a lot of arrests. The overtime was a little dicey, depending on what year it was, because sometimes they didn't have overtime money, so they'll give you time on the books to take off later, and sometimes they did have overtime money, or the only overtime money they would have is for late arrest in the courts. So they had a varying different rules at different times, but usually if you made an arrest, you got a couple of hours, even if it took you 4 hours, you got a couple hours of overtime. So guys there were guys who didn't make an arrest till the end of shift. And then there were other
Yeah.
guys like me that, we were busy all shift, because the other thing is you did get court overtime. They had to pay you court overtime.
Yeah, there
And,
there wasn't free time to do it. You could negotiate depending on the call and say, hey,
Yeah.
normally this is going to take 3 hours. Can I get 3 hours on this? And so you could kind of negotiate with the sergeant really as to what the amount would be instead of just a go until you're done deal. But in other words, a reasonable amount of time for this would be 3 hours. So I'll give you the 3.
well, okay. So yeah, so different call, and they did encourage us to make arrests. That was,
Absolutely,
I don't
yeah.
remember ever working at a place where they didn't encourage you to make arrests.
Yeah,
They
the
wanted you to
culture
make arrests.
was to be proactive. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it was a little different culture. Working by yourself, Vic. I mean, to me, I saw that and I go, wow, he must be really out there if he can't even find a partner that's going to work with them. I mean, if I was a supervisor, what the hell are you doing? No, that ain't going to happen. We're going to fix this, right? Did you see any uniformed guys working by themselves as a as a normal thing?
Yeah, if you listen, it's one of those things where you would float. So until you found a partner, and if you couldn't find a partner, you would find yourself in the station house being station house security or one of the inside positions. And if they didn't want you inside because you were being a pain in the ass, you would find yourself on a foot post somewhere. You'd have a block or 2 foot posts, south side of the, West 231st Street, Broadway to Kingsbridge Terrace. 11 o'clock meal, and the sergeant would come by twice a day and scratch your book to make sure you were on your post, and that would be your life. Now, foot posts aren't bad, depending on the neighborhood. You could eat well, right? Yeah. All the store owners like you, or they can drop you off in the middle of the South Bronx and around abandoned buildings. So it just depends. But yeah, if he's by himself all the time, it's that reoccurring theme that nobody wants to work with this guy.
Okay. All right, I think we're ready for a break, and when we come back from the break, we got to answer a question. He's 5'6", Al Pacino, I think, and somebody says, isn't he too short to be a cop? And we'll throw that question to Vic when we come back. Martina, are we ready for our break?
Okay.
Meet the Seattle Vigilante. Like so many comic heroes, this warrior hides his identity. But his identity isn't the only secret he has to keep. After grievous wounds received during combat, Tier 1 operator John Russell begins to recover and comes to terms with his new reality of being an amputee. And as he learns how to use his new prosthetic limb, he finds himself caught up in the bureaucratic red tape that too many wounded veterans experience, the exhausting medboard process. Out of sheer frustration, John takes it out on the criminal scum of the city. But when reality kicks in, John realizes he started something that's having an impact on the greater world around him, and thus has to reevaluate his motives. And moreover, just how far is John willing to go to finish this war he's declared against the criminals in Seattle? And will he even survive? From the creator of IDW's award-winning graphic novel Code Word Geronimo comes a new story about a different kind of warrior, Vindicated Inc., the first of its kind disabled veteran action hero comic. The Vindicated Inc. graphic novel crowdfunding campaign on fundmycomic.com is provided in the description of this video. We hope you become a contributor. Please share this link. Thank you.
There's only one location on the internet where you can get it all. Movie, TV, and comic industry. News and rumor analysis. Official scoops from Geekosity magazine. Reviews and interviews. So, when you need it to be Sunday, there's only one place to go, mate. Pop Culture Minefield. Well, they're always talking nerdy nerd stuff. Right, jog on then.
Okay, Vic, welcome back to Morning Coffee with the Chief. We're reviewing the movie Serpico. Vic, so 5'6". I mean, Paco in the movie was pretty short. Did you get a chance to meet Serpico? Was he 5'6", or was he a little bigger than that?
I did not meet Serpico or Al Pacino, but I do know that it would have been difficult for him to have been hired at that height, because I know the NYPD probably up until sometime in the 60s wanted guys at least 6 feet tall.
Got it. Okay, yeah, it's all right. And that didn't really change till probably the 70s, right? Particularly as they needed to hire more women, so you kind of got to reduce that. Let's see, Vic, what does your blue light district say? The one above those books or movies. Okay, what does it say?
That is from my book, The NYPD's Flying Circus, and above my shoulder it says Cops, Crime, and Chaos.
Is that one of your books, right?
Yeah.
That's correct. Okay, well, check out where they can go to Amazon, right? Search Vic Ferrari and find all your books, right? Ferrari and find all your books, right?
Yeah, just Vic Ferrari like the car.
Okay. All right, so 5'6" probably wouldn't cut it, so Al Pacino probably would not have been a real cop at the time. There's a great scene about sampling marijuana that I really need to ask if this was actually true, if the historical lore on the NYPD, did you guys sample, or the old generation, sample marijuana so that you knew the effects and you could identify it on the streets? Because I thought, no way, that can't be true.
No,
We did it. We did it.
I mean,
Did
I
you
got
do it
hired in 87 and there was zero tolerance. I mean, I remember, it's funny, when I got hired, you had to go to the applicant investigation unit and fill out tons of paperwork. And I remember some kid admitting on his application that he had smoked marijuana once, and he was out the door. So I can't even imagine 20 years earlier that they let guys sample drugs. I don't. And where would they get the marijuana from? Right? It's not like it's like nowadays where it's grown somewhere supposedly under regulations of a state, right? That must have been seized somewhere.
Yeah.
So I doubt that.
We did that. We did that in upstate New York, 77. I went through the academy there, and it was on a plate. We didn't have it in a cigarette. They burned it, and you, just like that room there, and you passed the plate around. You sniffed it in, and you passed the plate to the next guy.
I don't know what to say. I can't believe that.
I mean, that's 77, so that would be like 10 years prior to.
Yeah,
you know, we're upstate. We're upstate New York. No civil service. We got our own rules. The sheriff ran the county the way he wanted to.
Okay, so some truth to that, although that one was shocking to me.
Well,
okay.
that was truth where I came from, but we didn't have a cigarette. They had it on a plate, and they lit it up. Yeah.
Well, they do the whole scene where they get the munchies and need to go eat and all that stuff. And that's where he meets the one guy who ends up helping him down the road.
Yeah.
Becomes his the guy that helps to, and I forget his name, Bert, or in real life, he ends up Durkin. Yeah, he ends up testifying in front of the NAP commission. Both of them do eventually. But his first payoff, let's show the scene. First payoff. And he ends up working with a crew of guys who are undercover, and I think it was the Brooklyn or the Bronx, I can't remember which area it was, and they have a small pad going where they're getting $800 a month, which would have been a lot at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this, because this was, I think it was mid-60s, right? And
71 or 2, I think. But
well, the movie came out, I think he first reported it in 67, so I would imagine it would have happened before that. And that's the other thing. This is really a pretty rapid, so in mid to late 60s, this scandal happens. The book is written, and there's a movie about it in 73. A movie about it in 70. That's actually pretty quick. Normally, it takes a little while longer, but here he takes his first payoff, and here he's looking at it, $300. How do I deal with this? Now, we did have a scandal in Arco Narco where guys were working dope, and you could end up in there not necessarily, I don't know if they all knew they were going to a crew that was stealing money, but well, how do you deal with this? I mean, here's this guy, they hand him money, here's your $300 for whatever, the half the month or whatever it is, and he doesn't know what to do with it. He takes it to his friend here and tells him what's going on, and how do I solve this problem? And so almost immediately, as soon as he gets a payoff, he has a attack of conscience, right? Right, Vic?
Yeah, and he runs to his friend, and now they're trying to figure out the best way to address this. They know they're going to do something. They just don't know who to trust because he knows once people start finding out about this, that he's the one that's blowing the whistle, that his world's going to come crumbling down. So he's trying to tiptoe and navigate through this, but like it backfires.
Yeah, and they eventually go to somebody, and I don't know if you remember in the scene, they go to this guy, and I think he's renowned in the department. He's like an inspector or something like that, and he deals with corruption. And the guy blows it off. What are you doing, right? But on the table is the largest lobster I had ever seen. Did you notice this scene? The guy is eating this huge lobster. It looks like a small dog. That's how big this thing is. I know this is supposed to be a serious scene, but I'm like, he's eating this lobster. This huge lobster.
I think that's to show you just how corrupt everything is. To the restaurant he's in, and the guy's a civil servant. It looks like he's eating in like a 5-star French restaurant.
Right. And he kind of blows it off as it's just $300, no big deal. You know, if you do something, you know, you're going to be a target. You know, what do you want to do? And he talks him down. And I think this is where Serpico begins to realize that the corruption is endemic. It goes all the way to the top, or it is at least accepted all the way through the top. And of course he's disappointed. You can see it in his eyes. He's disappointed, but he doesn't really want to take the money. And he eventually goes back and tells the crew that, and the guy who's given the money just takes it for himself, right? So, Cliff, what do you think? Same kind of thing, and what'd you think of the Big Lobster too? I mean, did you notice that?
Yeah, and I didn't realize, like Vic said, you know, it kind of.
Look at that! I mean, look at that! It looks like a small dog there. That thing.
Yeah, you kind of, like Vic was saying. I guess you should look at these guys are they're eating high on the hog per se, and then you know, so, and it kind of goes along with what Serpico is pointing out, that it goes all the way to the top. Probably with these guys are all getting a piece of the pie. So probably appropriate that he's eating in a place like this. But yeah, that's the biggest lobster. They have a place in Vegas supposedly has the biggest lobsters, and yeah, that's similar to that.
Well, you know, and I didn't even think of it. You know, yeah, he probably got his meal paid for, Vic, right? But
yeah,
Serpico is probably thinking, this is the guy. This is the #1 guy for corruption in the city, and he's eating here. I can't afford to eat here. It'd be a month's paycheck to eat here, right? And he's at probably the most expensive thing on the menu is you know,
lobster, yeah,
dog lobster or whatever it is. And but anyways, he blows him off, which is has gotta be disappointing. Now, Vic, when you talk to old timers, their resentment was that this was the culture at the time, and the only people that were taking the shots were the lower guys. But it can only exist if the higher guys, if the executive team allows it, right?
Yeah, like so when I got hired, there were a lot of old timers around that worked up until the mandatory retirement age at 62. It's different now. Guys kind of tend to run out the door after 20, but back then they would hang around for a variety of reasons. So there were a lot of guys left from the Serpico era, and they hated him. I can honestly say in the NYPD, if someone called you Serpico or made a joke about it, it was a kick in the ass. Like, he was not, I'm telling you, I never met a guy on my job that had a fond word about him. You know, it's just one of those things where the movie paints him one way. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But yeah, there was widespread corruption, and cops would squash things for money, different arrests. I mean, you listen to these mob podcasts now where you have guys that are out that, you know, old men or their fathers were mobsters, and they say the cops would come to the house with a warrant. They would disappear with the cop, or the mobster would tell his wife, "How much money do we have in the house?" And they'd let him go. So I do think it was widespread. But again, like I said, it was the way the NYPD handled it that there was this blowback on Serpico.
Yeah, and the thing about executives is the higher it ends up being survival mode for you because you let it happen. So now you have to overcompensate by crushing it, so that your credibility is restored, I guess, is the way I look at it. Instead of just dealing with it over time. But this is also around this time that he gets our Bible thumping, bow tie wearing captain, right? And okay, so I got to ask Vic, did any bow tie wearers in your day that you're aware of that was their tradition just to stand out?
Not a bow tie, but I worked for a sergeant that was, listen, I'm Catholic. This guy was a holy roller, and he thought I was the greatest thing since sliced bread because I was Catholic. He wanted me in this unit, and it was just like that guy McCuskey. Like, I would bring in stolen cars, and this guy's whole thing was he wanted me to go around at night on the weekends and grab teenagers for drinking beer. And we had this enormous auto theft problem in my precinct, and I'm picking off car thieves, and he's like, Vic, if you were as good as picking off these car thieves as giving out these C summonses and taking alcohol away from children, you'd be the greatest thing since sliced bread. I was like, I couldn't work for the guy. Like, it just became too much. And P.S., the guy retired and became a priest.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Wow. Why
the Uvain.
I can understand maybe trying to get the juveniles before they go too far overboard, but you still got to mix it up. I mean, you got to get the people's rides back too. But I don't know. I did work for some guys who were
from our precinct. It was like prohibition.
I did work with a lot of guys who were very religious, and I respected them, but I didn't. I'm a faithful guy. I grew up Catholic like you, and went to church, altar boy, all that stuff, and Catholic schools and everything. And one of my greatest fans, Father John. Hey, John, how you doing today? My uncle, retired priest. He listens to all my shows. And I was a person of faith, but I didn't really talk about it at work. You know what I mean? The values were there. I lived those values as best I could, And the other thing is, particularly being a person of faith, that you tended to be a little more, as Catholics, you tended to be a little more forgiving with people. Does that make sense? Because that's how you were. Right. Forgiveness is a part of our faith, right? And so we looked at, they are all God's children. So here I am. I'm going down the holy roller path. I don't have a bow tie. I never worked a bow tie, and I never had anybody put their hand on the Bible at work. It's like everybody. I treated everybody the same because that's the way you're supposed to be. Vic, Cliff, you ever run across somebody who was a supervisor was a little overboard on faith and expected that from you? That would be a hard thing for you, I know, but. Anybody that you run across that pushed you in the area of faith at work?
No. I had some fellow deputies who just kind of ministered to me and introduced the Bible to me. But now there was one supervisor. He didn't push it, but he was a Mormon, obviously, because I couldn't understand. He doesn't drink coffee, and somebody told me, well, he can't. They don't drink caffeine. He's a Mormon. Oh, okay. No one ever did. No. I never came across that.
Okay, so before the show, Cliff, you told me that you had talked to somebody who had met Frank, and you got a little bit of bio on it. I think maybe this is time to get into that. Tell us about what you learned about Frank Serpico.
Yeah, so my buddy, who I worked with in Livingston County, he ended up retiring and becoming a judge, a municipal judge for the county. And then through his wife, somehow he learned where Serpico's place was, somewhere up in upstate New York, and so he thought, I'm going to go and going to meet Frank Serpico. It's going to go okay. So he found the road, and then he found the driveway, which basically had sign, don't come up here, turn around, go back. And if you hear him paint this picture, and then he gets there and he jumps out of the car because he sees Frank on a four-wheeler out behind this barn. It's like a country property. And then he gets out, and there's a red dot on his chest, and there's a lady with a rifle and says, get back in your car, turn around. And he had to hey, I'm a judge, and I just wanted to meet Frank. And, I was a cop. And Frank heard the commotion he saw, and he told her, put the gun down. That was his lady, I guess. And then, so Ray ended up, on the four-wheeler with Frank going around the property, and they became, pretty close friends because he said, I'm going to have Frank, I'm going to have him, sign a book for Frank. I'm going to give him your book, But so he had a good conversation with him, but he's really off the grid, and he just wants to live his own life in the hills there.
Well, I can imagine. I think we got a picture of Frank as an older guy. Martine, do we have a picture? I think it's Frank and
Now he has made some
Al
appearances
Pacino.
recently. He has been on some shows.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's him.
That's him. Yep. And he looks like he's in his late 60s there, early 70s.
Yeah.
And okay, you can take it down. And so you said he's been making some appearances. Did you?
Yeah. If you
listen
look on YouTube, you'll see actually he watched the show on a laptop with a guy, and they showed him, and it says even in his upstate New York community, he's frequently seen around town, and people talk to him, and you can tell that he's pretty low key now and more open to talking. You can tell he's not really into being a recluse as far as he's willing to talk to people. And it was the first time that he actually saw that scene where he was shot, that Al Pacino did. He was really, he says that it really took him back. It was very uncomfortable for him. But then he went on to tell you about the one scene with the gold shield. He goes, that never happened. That was a Hollywood part of it. He said, I did, they handed it to me across, the desk. He said there was no ceremony or anything, but yeah, so interesting.
It was like what was interesting in this show and in comparison to Prince of the City is a very small circle of people end up being friendly with. One, they commend you for your hard work. They commend you for the sacrifice you make. You're doing the right thing. Although I think Lucio, I forget the name of the officer in Prince of the City, but he was played by the late Treat Williams. He was part of the team, and he was corrupt, and then he changed courses. But he like Serpico, as we get into this, wanted to deal with the corruption as it went up, because in his feeling, he's telling people what's going on, and nothing is happening.
Yeah,
nothing is happening. So for him, it wasn't just an indictment on the officers who are taking money, taking money from the crooks. It's also an indictment on the people who refuse to do anything about it. And which is, and that's true. If you don't do anything about it, it just grows as a problem, right? And the question is was it the culture, the generation before, who are now the supervisors, right? And it probably was. So it was accepted. And so it's going to be the exception to the rule is the person who's clean, because of the systemic corruption, and not only with police. I mean, we tend to talk about police because these are crime dramas, but we can, in LA, we've had, let's see, 4 city councilmen indicted, convicted, and sentenced. I think Mark Ridley Thomas is the latest one that's fighting Jose Huizar, Mitch Englander, and I'm forgetting the other one now. And they just had another one indicted, Price Current. So it's the shows are always about the police because it's a much more interesting subject, the police. But we have corruption within the city ranks, and we see that with New York City as well. They have regular corruption scandals over contracting and things like that in New York City, right, Vic?
Our police union.
Our police.
Yeah. A lot of cops don't like Rudy Giuliani. I happen to like him because he let us do our job. When Rudy was running for mayor, he promised us a lot of things. He said he was going to take care of us and we were going to make more money and yada, yada, yada. Rudy gets in and the city's a mess financially. So Rudy's pitch to us was make the arrests, you'll get the overtime, and I'm going to back you guys. Well, that wasn't good enough for a lot of the guys. And our union really dug in its heels and didn't want to accept the contract. And like any union, there's this stuff going on behind the scenes. And what Rudy did was, as a former federal prosecutor, he had the Southern District of New York feds look into our union. Well, a law firm representing our union got indicted and went to jail. And we took a contract of, I think it was 0, 0, 2, 2, and 3 or something. It was something ridiculous. So, yeah, there's always corruption going on behind the scenes.
Well, what was the union selling out the troops by taking lower?
No, I think it was more their expenses, their billing. Oh, yeah. This is 20 something years, closer to 30 years ago, but if you want to look it up, there was because then our union had to scramble and find another law firm.
Yeah, I think you have to. I was on union for about 4.5 years. I've never indicted, so I did a good job on it. And what I learned about it is there is a whole business to the unions, and there's a lot of money that flows. All your dues, generally, a big chunk of the expense is fighting for your rights, right? It's civil service or whatever it is, fighting a discipline thing. And then there's a lot of money because the union that we hired lawyers to do it. So you had lawyers on contract, but we had the union I was on was for the supervisor union. We had a stable of law firms that we would hire. And so if you were next up, or if you had a specialty in a particular area, you got that gig, right? But the deputies union had one law firm that did everything. And, ultimately I thought there was a conflict of interest, because if you had multiple guys on a case, your lawyer is going to fight for you. If you had less culpability than somebody else, when this law firm did everybody together, they tended to want everybody to stick together, which is not always in the best interest of an individual officer, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and eventually they changed that. They went to a model like the Professional Police Officers Association for Los Angeles County. That's the board that was the union I was on. They eventually went to that. So there some corrupt practices could come in where the officer's not. It's not in the officer's best interest. And the thing about unions is a lot of them. It's a lot of folks, and I'm guilty of this too. I didn't really pay attention to a lot of what was going on in the union all the time, and you should, because it's really in your best interest to hold those guys accountable. And not everybody who gets elected to the union is actually a good leader. Right. It might just be the guy who buys the most drinks, So you really got to pay attention to what's going on in the union. So it's good that he did that. But I was really talking about corruption in city government as well. That happens, and it certainly happened in LA. It happens in New York. So as we talk about corruption with police, who we do hold to a high standard, keep in mind our political figures also engage in corruption. I do think the thing going on with Letitia James and Trump is corrupt. That's a corrupt political persecution, in my opinion. I'm not a real estate guy, but that's just to me, that's just example of acceptable corruption in the state of New York. I don't know if you guys want to weigh in on that, but that's how I see it. What do you think, Cliff?
Well, you have a civil crime, or let's say you have there was no loss. The banks got all their money back. There was no complaints. They made their money back. And so, the weaponization of that law, how can we use this? Oh, we can use this. And matter of fact, we can have it so there's no jury, and we can do a summary judgment ahead of time. Basically, the only thing we're going to do in this hearing is talk about sentencing. Yeah. If you have the official who brings these charges says before the election, my one goal is, if you get me in, I'm going to bring him down and bring charges against this man. So, I mean, how much deeper do you want to go for that? It's almost in your face. I mean,
to me, it's because the other thing is they have a specialty court for this kind of stuff, and she moved it out of that court to a friendlier court to get what she wanted. So to me, that's corruption. If you got to change the rules to get where you want to go, then that's just as
well. Look at it this way. So 18 million, you overinflated it. Okay, now that we've got a judgment for 400 million, guess what? We're saying now it's worth 250 million, and you can sell that to pay us for the bail. You can't have it both ways, and it's just such an obvious. But like you say, a lot of people aren't paying attention to these things.
No, they're not, because there's a lot of Trump haters out there, and I like his policies. I like he's supportive of police. I kind of wish we'd have some people in their 60s who are running, but that's just me. I think we need to get a new generation of thoughtful leaders in there. But let's show the scene protected, because this is, so he goes out and he makes an arrest. He gets some information that there's some drug dealing going on and some payoffs going on with somebody from the mafia. He's working alone. Here he is. He's looking like he's a meat cutter just watching this. Here's our bad guy. And he eventually makes this arrest by himself, which again, like, to me, is so confusing. I don't get this, but he does this by himself, and he takes him into the station, and his guys, hey kid, where you come from? Where are they hiding you? This kind of this whole affable thing he's got going on with this gangster's going on with the cops. And he's not at all worried. You can tell he's not at all worried. He ends up going to the station, and he's treated I don't want to say like royalty, but he's treated in a very friendly manner immediately as soon as he gets into the station with Frank. And the guys working the station, they're already suspicious of Frank, right? He's not going along with the program. He's not part of the team there. And they take him upstairs. And then when Frank eventually gets up there to get this guy, he melts down because they're treating him like he's something special. And this is actually I don't know if there was violence in the truth of this story, but this is a true story. And the guy that he arrested, this gangster that he arrested, Rudy, the real name is Rudy Santobello, from the Genovese crime family, was actually a true life figure. And he runs a background check on him, and he finds out that he actually killed a cop off duty. And the cop's name is Alfred Loretto. And these guys are treating him like he's one of the guys, and it just pisses off Frank. He says, you guys say, hey, you're all about cops, but this guy killed a cop. And that, to me, this was a shocking part of the story. I don't know if you knew this story, Vic, or not, but I had to look it up, and it's actually true. This guy killed a cop. He was arrested by Serpico, and I don't know how dramatic it was in real life, but if they're taking money from this guy, which I believe they were, they don't even do a background check. I mean, so anyways, you want to comment on the scene?
Yeah, like you said, it did make sense to me that he arrested the guy by himself. Then he puts the guy in the guy's own car and makes the bad guy drive him to the station. I've never seen something like that before. Is it possible? Sure, it's possible back then. As you were explaining it, I was writing down the names because now I'm fascinated about this. I just thought that was Hollywood folklore, so I'm going to look into it later on today. Yeah, it looks like all the detectives know this guy, and he's been greasing their palms for a while, and they're getting pissed. They're not mad that the guy got arrested. They're more mad that Frank is the one that locked him up, and that definitely looks like an NYPD arrest processing area.
Ah, got it. Well, here I got Loretto up here. Let's see. It's good. Patrolman Alfred Loretto was shot and killed by 2 robbery suspects while off duty. Patrolman Loretto observed 2 men beating, robbing, and attempting to kidnap a man on the street near the corner of Yates Avenue and Morris Park Avenue in the Bronx. And the 2 suspects fled the location in a car. Patrolman Loretto pursued the suspects in his own vehicle. Okay, I would tell guys don't do that. And was able to force him off the road. As he approached the suspect vehicle, they fired 4 shots, fatally wounding him. Both suspects, aged 24 and 31, were apprehended at the scene. 3 civilians and a firefighter witnessed the incident. They were charged with murder and robbery. And on May 1st, 1951, the men were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. In 1966, the Supreme Court ruled the illegal search led to the release of the youngest suspect. He bought a bar in the Bronx in New York that was raided in 1969 that led to his arrest for illegal gaming and watering down whiskey. He was arrested by Frank Serpico, and he was a member of the Genovese crime family. So it is true, although it doesn't sound like this is the same story that you saw in the movie. He definitely was a part of the Genovese crime family, and this happened. So it is true.
Yeah, and that's not far from where I grew up. Like my head is spinning. Morris Park is like the next neighborhood over from where I grew up.
Well, let's honor Alfred Loretto. Hey, we appreciate your service, and I'm glad that we could at least talk about your story here on our show. But that was shocking to me. They find out he killed the cop, and he says, "Do you even check these guys out before you take the money from them?" And I get it. I get it, right? And here's our captain again. He's telling him, and of course, nothing's going to happen. So, Cliff, what'd you think of the scene? This guy, and are you a little shocked that they didn't even do a background check on these guys that are taking money from?
No, because, like I learned from Vic and you really, and some other people that, a lot of these people, right, as they're younger, they're growing up together, these families who are cop families, then mob families. And, there might be generation upon generation that know each other. And he might be one of those guys. Hey, I went the cop route and you went the mafia. We understand our roles here, and maybe there's going to be some wash over there. So it kind of it kind of would made sense. And probably these guys are shocked that, hey, Serpico's doesn't know what he's dealing with here. It might not even be, we guarantee his safety if they, arrested this guy.
Well, those guys probably drinking that guy's bar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and his watered down whiskey.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, anyways, so obviously Hollywood didn't go too far out of bounds on this. This is actually true that these guys were
Yeah.
hanging out with this guy. I mean, we had these whole rules on fraternization, who you fraternize with. If you hung out with guys who had criminal records and you drank with them, that was a problem. And people got in trouble for that on the sheriff's department, for the LA County Sheriff's Department. It was actually particularly important for sheriff's department had it, because you end up working the jails first, right? And you end up meeting all of these crooks. Let's say you don't grow up with them like we talked about in New York, but you actually meet them in the jail. And this is what happens if you work in a jail, if you work in a prison, and you start working the streets. They all recognize you first. They all, if they're going to recognize you, because you're used to looking at hundreds of inmates, right? And I remember walking through a mall, and somebody comes up to me, "Hey, Deputy Jordan, how you doing?" "Oh yeah, I was at XYZ jail. I just wanted to say hi." And I'm thinking, with my wife, I'm like, oh great. So they recognize you way before you recognize them, right? And so I don't know. I forget what.
Well, what about Mario at the Rainbow Room on Sunset? I mean, no one paid for a meal there. No deputy told me don't go to dinner there because he's connected. Only a captain later came and says no one will eat there because this guy's a made guy.
Yeah, I think I was working night detective, and so I got called in by organized crime guys, and they said, "Hey, these are the places we'd like you to stop and visit every now and then, because they are connected. Just see what's going on and just give us some notes," right? And of course, they all knew who I was because I worked the streets there for years. So nobody's gonna. And I wasn't. As you know, Cliff, I wasn't the guy that went to the clubs. After I went home.
That was me. That was me.
I didn't do any of that stuff, so I didn't have any relationships with these guys other than work, right? And so, so I didn't get any intel for the organized crime guys, but it was really the first time somebody actually sat me down and said, "Yeah, these are the places that are likely connected, and here are they connected to." And I think it was. Who was Gotti's folks? Is he Gambino's, right?
He was supposed to Gambino family.
Yeah, that's what they said. Some of them were connected with, and they actually showed me some pictures of Gotti's son.
Did you guys ever have any? I know it's off topic, but did you guys ever have any dealings with that club owner that was involved with the Wonderland murders?
That was a little bit before our time, and that would have been Eddie Nash, right? And so the guys that I worked with in detective bureaus, Joel Brown, he's the one I remember. Mario Lafredo, who's a reserve detective, but they were well aware of that because it was just outside of West Hollywood's area in LAPD's area. It was Cliff. I want to say it was at Crescent Heights and Sunset. Their little cutout is LAPD's area, right?
That's right.
And so it was. What was the name of it? Starwood, I think, was the name of their club. And so a lot of that stuff happened before us, but before me anyways, because I started working there in 85, and I think that was late 70s, early 80s, the Wonderland murders. But a lot of the guys I worked with in DB, they were a generation before me, they were well aware of that guy, Eddie Nash. And he got him and his bodyguard pretty much, I don't want to say they skated on it, but they never really got convicted of murder for that, right? They got him for other stuff, and I think the only one who really did any real weight on that is John Holmes. John
Holmes, the porn star.
He was involved in that stuff, and they think that he actually opened the door and let those guys in. And it's an interesting story. I've read up on that story, but Eddie Nash and Starwood, and when I started working the streets in '85. There was powder cocaine everywhere on the Sunset Strip because you had the Rainbow Room, you had the Roxy, you had the Whiskey A Go-Go, you had Gazzari's was still around at the time, you had the Comedy Store, and in fact, if one of the guys from the Retiree Roundup is listening, Steve Skirnich, we went to an after-hours club. I wasn't much for going to the clubs, but he knew everybody. And so the Comedy Store would close, and all the comedians would go to this after-hour place across the street called Butterfields, I think. So he wanted to go there, and we went there a couple times. And let's see, Robin Williams was there, Sam Kinison was there. I don't remember some of the other comics because I wasn't into the scene. You know, I just remember those guys. And Steve, they all knew Steve. They loved Steve because but I could tell, okay, these guys are high. They're on coke. And I told Steve, hey, one night a week I'll go out and party with you, but you know, I can't do this every night thing because it's just too much. But so yeah, there was a lot of coke going on at the time, Vic. So I can see with Starwood and some of this stuff happening, there was a lot of dealing. I mean, you could easily make a coke arrest within a half hour of your shift on PMs or early morning shifts. I mean, particularly on early morning shift. You know, you just go out right at 10 or 11, boom, go right to the clubs, go to the parking lot, somebody's snorting coke, boom, you got your arrest. I mean, that's how easy it was. It was shooting fish in a barrel on Sunset Strip. And if you wanted to get meth, you just went on Boys Town, which is the gay strip, which Santa Monica is also ran through the town. A lot of clubs, a lot of drinking, a lot of dope. You can get meth within 10. In fact, my training officer said, okay, let's see if you can make an arrest. Go right down to the east side, boom, 20 minutes. I got my guy in my back seat. He goes, oh, okay, that's pretty good. It's the first time I drove, right? So I pay attention, you know. But yeah, anyways, okay, let's get into internal investigation. So Frank is starting to push because he's frustrated. He's been to the Bronx. They move him to Manhattan, a much bigger pad in Manhattan. I forget what the amounts they talked about in Manhattan, but he goes to Manhattan. He gets out of where he was at. They know who he is, so they know what's going on. So I stayed in West Hollywood back in 2006 in the Ramada Inn. Ate at the restaurant that once was the recording studio where the Doors recorded L.A. Woman. Yes, that's exactly right. There's little Cienega was a place where I think Jim Morrison used to stay. So there's a lot of I don't know if it's still there. I think it was still there the last time I worked there, but a lot of interesting folklore in that town. That's where Sal Mineo was killed. The guy who was in. Yeah, he was killed in there, and so a lot of West. In fact, if you look at some of the old movies, West Hollywood is a big part of it. The thing about West Hollywood, it was incorporated in 1984, so it was a county area. So it was I don't want to say it was a little more Wild West, but there was a lot more progressive attitude, right? And then it incorporated, and they actually, even though they're progressive, they actually cleaned up the city a little bit, but they still believe in, as long as the vice is behind the scenes in that city, it seems to be acceptable. In Internal Affairs, though, he's trying to push, and he's talking to these folks. Hey, this corruption is widespread. We need to do something about it. And I felt it was really interesting. He's raising the fact that we have this corruption, and it's big in Manhattan. He tells this captain who's not doing anything, and he's now pushing. So here he is, he's meeting with a bunch of executives in the station. Of course, they make sure that everybody in the station knows what's going on, or the precinct knows what's going on. And he asks them, you know, did everybody have to know that we were meeting here today? But the most interesting thing about this scene, having been chief, is you take this big mess to the commissioner, and the commissioner says, well, you guys handle it. You guys handle it. And of course, you know, the chief wisely says, well, this is actually pretty big. Well, I'm confident you guys can handle it. If you need help, talk to my number 2. And you know, to me, that was shocking. You know, it implied a couple of things. This is your mess, clean it up. Number 1. Number 2, we don't want it to get beyond your precinct. You handle it, right? Or beyond your division. What do they call it? A chief has what? A division that he's responsible for, Vic?
It can be a borough, it can be a zone, it just depends. But they're not doing him any favors. So you got, when someone walks into an NYPD station house in a suit, everybody looks at him. So it looks like he's walking into his precinct or wherever he works, and there's 4 or 5 guys in suits that went upstairs. Somebody is going to know who one of those guys are. He's done. At that point, there's no coming back from it. You know, he should have they should have either showed up at his house one day, or given him a bogus court notification and sent him somewhere else. For those guys to show up there like that, he's done. And they're doing it purposely to out him.
Yeah, absolutely, and to make it much more uncomfortable. And you can see that in the movie, and based upon Serpico's reaction afterwards, that's probably fairly accurate. Now, Vic, I think one of the things that we talked about on previous shows, I think I talked to you about this, is how NYPD changed their internal affairs, how they professionalized internal affairs, and how it got better. And this is just, I thought it was very interesting how they did this, and it's obviously there's a lot of changes you have to make when you're trying to change the culture of an organization. But this was very interesting, the one that you taught. You want to tell that story, how they professionalized what it was before and how they professionalized it again? Because I think it's really, from an organizational change standpoint, it's really creative and effective.
Yeah, and that was under the Giuliani administration. So when I got hired, internal affairs were career guys. Like, it was a dead end. If you went there, you could never work anywhere else. So if you went in there as a cop or a sergeant or lieutenant, your career was over because no one would ever want to talk to you. It's like when I first got hired, if you went to a barbecue, at some cop's family's house, there wouldn't be a guy there saying, "Oh yeah, that's my brother-in-law that works in internal affairs." He wouldn't be invited to that barbecue. I mean, it was just what Giuliani figured out, and the people that under him, they wanted to get talent up there, and they wanted people in internal affairs that the cops could trust. So to go into a specialized unit like organized crime, there's an interview. And what they did was, when you go for your organized crime interview, there's going to be vice, narcotics, auto crime, specialized unit. Well, they gave it's like the NFL draft. So what they did was they gave internal affairs a seat at the table, and they gave them the first couple of draft picks. So say, for argument's sake, I was a detective in auto crime. I get promoted sergeant. I go back to a precinct for 2 years. Now I want to get back into organized crime. When I go for my OCCB organized crime interview, they're going to be asking me a lot of questions, all these specialized units, and internal affairs is going to turn around and go, "Oh, wow, this guy worked in auto crime. He's good at insurance fraud. Cops burn their cars occasionally." I would definitely have gotten swept up into internal affairs for 2 years. If you did your 2 years in internal, you can decline it and go back to patrol. But if you go to internal affairs for 2 years, you were allowed to go back into organized crime. You could pick where you wanted to work. And it removed the stigma of guys that work there. And it forged relationships where then people could go to internal affairs without having to worry about something backfiring like you see in that scene in Serpico.
Yeah, I like that story because I say on my other show, I'm a public policy nerd, organizational, and that is actually very creative to change the culture of internal affairs, but also the perception of internal affairs within the department. Because that means maybe, if you're in a bullpen with, 10 investigators, maybe 2 or 3 of them have worked internal affairs before now. And they're good coppers, they're good detectives, and that's just, by just doing that, you very quickly change the mindset about internal affairs. I think it's something the LA County Sheriff's Department and LAP should consider, just because I think because there is still a little bit of a us versus them whenever internal affairs shows up, and I think that's some natural that's natural to some degree. But if you want your organization to be the best it can be, then you want your best and brightest and most capable investigators going into internal affairs, and using those skill sets to weed out the corrupt cops. I mean, we have internal affairs and then we have internal criminals. I imagine NYPD specialized in those who did policy violations versus those who did criminal violations. Was that separate for you, or was it all the same umbrella?
Well, different units handle different things. So if you're talking about policy, you're talking about betting.
Yeah, well, I mean, policy issues. Let's see. Maybe you didn't handle some stuff right. Maybe you didn't handle.
Okay. I'm sorry.
And then you got policy, one where you're actually committing crimes.
Yeah, no, I get it. No, see, when you said policy in New York, policy means illegal betting.
Yeah.
So it kind of threw me a curve. Yeah, internal affairs is broken up into different units in internal affairs. They've got ones that handle major crimes. They have ones that do the nitpicking, and then for the real nitpicking, we have borough inspections, which will handle things of allegations of I wouldn't, not corruption, but more misconduct, or someone doing something stupid. Someone working a side gig and leaving work 15 minutes early, or someone that's chronically late, or things like that.
Yeah, so that's because ours is internal criminals, so it's separate from internal affairs, because one is more policy, another one is definitely violations of the law. But he ends up in Manhattan, and I like the Inspector Lombardo, who I believe is probably a real character. I didn't look up the background on him, but he goes to Manhattan and he makes it clear, I'm clean. If you need somebody to work with, I'll work with you. And I thought it was comical, because I don't know where inspectors are. There's probably like captains on our department, I guess. I can't imagine some captain jumping from one roof to the other like you see Lombardo. And you could see him going, what did I get into? Here's this executive who's probably got 15 years on Frank, and he's out there working the streets with Frank. So Frank has a partner he can trust. But he finds out that the pad is even bigger in Manhattan, and the stakes are higher because they're bigger in Manhattan. It implies that they set him up and they shot him, and we'll get into that. But he's again is not taking money, and that sets him apart from everyone else, right? Except for this inspector. And then you can see the inspector gets mad too. Who's taking money? You can see that sign where he approaches one of the guys and grabs him by the collar or the tie. I can't remember what it is. And then it implies to me that there are some guys who probably tolerated the grift, but they're clean themselves and they understand and they can relate to Frank, because there are a few guys that on the job working that supported Frank. Clearly not enough to make sure to try and do their best to help keep Frank safe, right? I mean, it wasn't all bad, I guess. So you did have clean. And so what do you think of the inspector? One, going out on the streets. I can't see myself volunteering as a captain to go do plain clothes, but I guess that does happen. Ever see that where you had a executive go out there and plain? Well, New York's a little different. I see lieutenants and inspectors out there mixing it up in riots sometimes on the TV. So they're more hands-on than the captains and the
early in my career. No, early on, the supervisors tended to be older guys and knew their place and didn't, want to get rocking and rolling around on the ground with people. But as my career progressed, and you had younger guys taking the test and were getting promoted younger, so you might have, it was rare, but you might have a 35-year-old captain or a 38-year-old deputy inspector that, they were still cops and they still wanted to rock and roll with the guys. It's rare, but it does happen from time to time. And when you're talking about riots and stuff, well, that's all hands on deck. And they want the white shirts out there to supervise, to make sure the cops don't get too stick happy. So that's why you see them out there out front.
Yeah, it's you're supposed to be like pulling people back, but sometimes you see those guys going over the top. I want to get in there. So anyway, so he goes to Manhattan. He finds out it's kind of the same old thing, just a lot more money, and they're much more serious about it. And he keeps pushing. And one of the things he keeps saying, well, what about the bosses? The bosses know about this. They're not doing anything about this. If the bosses did something about it, it would change. And then they go into where he gets set up on the deal. And I go ahead and let's roll the setup here where he actually gets shot. And I don't think they ever determined that these guys actually set him up. I don't know if that's not. I didn't see prosecutions for guys. I'm sure there was a lot of suspicion. But what was the scuttlebutt, Vic? Did people actually believe that he was set up, or this was just a straight drug deal gone bad?
I never heard that he was set up. The one thing that they show about him throughout the movie, and I don't know it's true, he tended to be a lone wolf and do things by himself. So, again, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Maybe those guys really didn't have his back, or maybe he did something to put himself in harm's way.
Yeah, because he is a reasonably aggressive cop, and he's willing to work on his own. And it was interesting how the tenements where he actually sees something going on, he ends up going up top and he's watching it. Are the buildings like that where you would do top surveillance and bottom surveillance to try and see what's going on, see what floor they're on? And then in this case, he's watching to see what they do, how many knocks they do, what they say to maybe gain entry. Is that all realistic?
Oh yeah, the building, the hallway. I mean, they got that right.
And so he does this, and he hears the how many knocks, like I said, how many knocks, exactly what he says. And then he goes and he tells the guys, okay, one guy comes out, they detain him, and he says, okay, let's go back up. And so here's the two guys that take him up there. And
I met that
I don't
guy.
know. Did you meet the guy? The one guy?
Yeah,
the actor?
yeah. He was also he's a good friend of Al Pacino's, and Pacino got him a role in Scarface. I met him in a bar in Manhattan. We were buying each other drinks. Really nice guy.
Well, what's his name? Do you remember?
F. Murray Abraham. He won an Oscar for Amadeus.
Oh, okay. F. Murray Abraham. So they go up here, and this, under exigent circumstances. Now, this is all before a lot of the rules came in about search warrants. So they're going in to kick the door to get the drugs, I imagine.
Right.
And as he gets through, he gets pinned, and he's carrying looks like he's carrying a Browning automatic is what it looks, or a 45 is looks like what he's carrying. It's a big gun for him, and he can't seem to get it through the door. And this is the part. It's like, okay, is this truth or was this dramatization? Clearly, Serpico felt he was set up, and they didn't have his back. I heard stories about the guys, they don't like a guy, or maybe he's said something to, and they didn't get his back. I never really saw that on the sheriff's department. There are always people who are going to back up the other guy. And so I had a hard time with this. Was this truth? Because if it's true, why weren't they prosecuted?
Right.
And, but he clearly did get shot. So he was doing a drug raid and he did get shot. So we appreciate his sacrifice. And so Cliff, what'd you think of the scene?
I like it reminded me of the kind of a humorous where he buys the gun. This takes 15 in the clip. Are you expecting an army? And he goes, no, just a division.
Yeah.
Funny.
It's one, and that's, I guess I can understand so he's taken on the whole,
he was preparing. He kind of had an idea that something might go south. And he had partners telling him, you got to be careful. You're going to narcotics where things can happen where it could be unproven whether you were left out to hang or not.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see the shooting scene here. You see him down, and of course they react like they would normally react when a cop goes down. They scoop him and they run. And, of course, now suddenly he's shot and everybody reacts, and everybody, this hospital thing where the guys won't go in and talk to him. I had a hard time with that. I didn't understand that. Maybe that was the culture at the time with these guys.
I believe it.
But you believe it? And
back then,
but then all the people who let him down show up too, right? The guys who could only push it so far. The guy from the mayor's staff who would only go so far. People who wouldn't put themselves out there like he did show up to make sure he's okay. And then suddenly, cop gets shot. Cop who's speaking out, cop who's going to testify. Now everybody's interested in doing an investigation. So Vic, you want to comment on that?
I mean, that's basically what happened. I mean, if everything they say is true as far as him setting off alarm signals and no one did everything about it, and then now he gets shot. Now the newspapers are going to interview him. I think a lot of people that he might have spoke to or tried, trying to get their attention, now all of a sudden they're going to start getting asked for comment in the local papers. So that's when it was, they formed the Knapp Commission and had these hearings. And that's when heads started to roll once it got out in the newspapers.
And did Delaney, there was a chief, Commissioner Delaney, he's gone after this, right? So
I don't know if they used I don't know if they used the real names.
Okay.
But I'm sure there was a purge. I'm sure a lot of guys retired or were told, it's time to go.
Yeah, no more dog-sized lobsters for some of these guys, right? They're on their way out, and they're eating Spam somewhere. So, hey, thanks for coming on the show, Cliff. Any final comments on the movie Serpico?
No, I just love the movie just because I don't know. I loved that was another movie that just sparked my desire to go to New York City, and I ended up not going there, but I remember taking the test in 1982 and then seeing what the Vic and the boys did with Giuliani later on and seeing the turnaround that was miraculous. It was definitely a night and day a thing that happened over a few years there. But I love the movie. I just love the genre and I love the way it was filmed. And I liked it.
Yeah, I did too. I don't know if I don't think I ever wanted to go to New York to be a cop there, but it's a sad tale. You know, the interesting thing, Vic, I'll throw this out there to you guys. Listening to a podcast from the Manhattan Institute, you probably figure out that's kind of stuff I do in my free time. And they were talking about New York is trying to push their cops to be more proactive, but they have a whole generation of people who were not because of under de Blasio or whatnot. They did not do aggressive policing. Now they got to retrain them how to be proactive policemen. Seems like we were coming full circle now.
Yeah, but even if they're proactive, are they going to prosecute these cases?
No, yeah.
Well, probably not in Manhattan with Bragg. You know, it's
The Bronx.
The Bronx too. Same thing. They got the same kind of setup there. It's interesting. They got multiple lead prosecutors for different boroughs, so you can have different attitudes in different places for the prosecutors. Hey, folks, thank you for joining on the show. Thank you, Vic, for coming back, and thank you, Cliff, for coming back. You can catch their podcasts as stated earlier, and also do me a favor, watch my show tomorrow, a briefing with the chief. What am I doing tomorrow? I have somebody running for the assembly coming on, and that should be a conversation. And and CC Wood is coming on. We're talking about some of the local corruption stuff in LA, so it should be a good show. Briefing the chief, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KJRA. DB.com. Guys, thank you for coming on. And Martine, you can take it away.